Yeah, I mean, did you see this, Raj? I don't know if you're all over Niner content, but
Yeah,
Joe Montana,
yeah.
you did see this?
I talked about it last night. Actually, let's get into it.
Yeah, let's get into this. Joe Montana went on with Mike Silver, I believe.
Yeah,
It was on the Open Mic podcast with Silver, and basically said that he would start if it was up to him, Jimmy Garoppolo over Trey Lance next year. And Montana explained it. He said Garoppolo's won a lot of games. I can't say the same for Trey. You don't know that from him. I don't think it's hard. I think you just start Jimmy. So, Montana's obviously a very much a pro Jimmy guy. I'm not sure if Joe knows that Jimmy's a free agent and that Kyle Shanahan has basically already said that he ain't coming back. But what do you think? We have two ex-Niner Hall of Fame quarterbacks who have a totally different approach to things. Joe, when he talks about the Niners, says they. When Steve talks about the Niners, he says we.
yeah,
Steve, I think, because he's an announcer, is a little bit more up to speed on today's game. But Joe obviously knows the game, sees the game, but is really not a fan of Trey Lance or not a fan of Brock Purdy or a huge fan of Garoppolo, because it seems like every time there's an opportunity, he's saying how highly he thinks of Garoppolo. What was your takeaway on when you saw that story?
yeah. First and foremost, the first thing I noticed was I knew when I saw that, I was like, oh God. Again, 49ers Twitter, I knew they were about to have a field day because that video is all over. Like the comments on that were wild. And I knew it was going to be something that the Niner fans are like, oh my God, this man is senile. Like, I love Joe, a legend, a great player. My dad, that was his play. That's why he became a Niner
Oh,
fan. But listen,
Joe can do no wrong
sometimes
in many of our eyes.
in many of our eyes, right? Like our idols, like me, Steve Young's my guy. But I was a little upset when because he still threw Steve Young under the bus in that interview. He goes, Brock was given a team that was tailor made to win, just like somebody else I knew. I was like, damn, this is 30 years later, and you still
He
take a
ain't
shot
over
to
it.
Steve, man. He's not over it. So part of me feels like he's still kind of salty and bitter. But you said something that really resonated with me. I don't think he likes these younger quarterbacks, especially Trey Lance, because every year he's had the opportunity, he's always said Jimmy's the guy. Like the last 3 years running, he says Jimmy's the guy. And no disrespect to Jimmy, but you're right. Kyle already said for the second year in a row, there's no chance he's coming back. And this year he's not under contract; he's a free agent. So they would have to go out of their way to bring him back. And again, with Bosa coming in with the big contract extension, it just doesn't make sense. And to me, if Kyle was to get on the phone and say, "Hey, Jimmy, we need you back," that would be super awkward for all parties involved because he's already said for the second year in a row, we don't need him. And I get what Joe was saying. Like, I get his stance. They have been a winning team with Jimmy under, the helm. Like we said Kyle has only won with certain quarterbacks, and Jimmy was one of them. So I get what his take is, but I think he needs to get up to speed with Jimmy's not an option. Like, he's probably not an option, because of the free agency. And I agree with what you said about Steve. He sees it from the lens now. Like, he knows he's a little bit more up to speed. So part of me was like, okay, does Joe know? Because Silver tried to go in there and chime in and say, hey, look, Joe, he's a free agent, but Joe still fought it. He goes, well, they still won games with them. They still won games. So part of me thinks that he just is not happy with their young quarterbacks, and he's determined on somehow getting Jimmy in there. And part of me thinks he's just salty at Steve Young for whatever reason, the years
Well,
later.
you saw the doc, right? Did you see the Montana
Yeah,
doc all the way
yeah,
through?
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Joe is still not over it. I mean,
No,
he's still mad at George Seifert
yeah,
for basically not giving him a chance. And you know what? I mean, I get it. Because in real time there in the early 90s, I was a Joe guy. I was like, hey, Joe should not lose his job for injury. And but he had been gone for multiple years, and Steve had ascended to be not just a very good player, not just a Pro Bowl player. Steve had ascended to a Hall of Fame
mm-hmm.
MVP of the league type player.
Yeah,
And so that was what Seifert sided with Steve because Steve had more ability to help George going forward than Joe
yeah.
did. But Joe was bitter about that, and to this day it sounds like he's carried some bitterness with him. So I mean, I guess we should just kind of understand that guys who are insanely competitive, like a Michael Jordan, a Derek Jeter, a Joe Montana, that in some ways they never stop competing.
No.
And we
Yeah,
just
you're
have to kind
absolutely
of
right.
understand that that's what that gene of competition does, right? And that I don't understand it because I'm not on that level. And maybe you don't either because we're just not on that level.
Yeah.
But if you're an insane competitor like Michael Jordan and you're going to the Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield, Mass, instead of just thanking everybody, he's got to still grind everybody because he's so competitive. He's MJ. And that's what made MJ MJ. And I guess that's what made Joe Joe. I just and I want to give Joe enough understanding because I'm sure, I mean, to me, watching that documentary, seeing that Joe Montana in 1991 had led the Niners to all the Super Bowls they had ever won. And George Seifert told him, and it came out in that documentary, to he could work out in the facility, but be gone when the rest of the players come in here from practice. I mean, that's how you treat
Wow.
a guy who won you the 81, 84, 88, 89 Super Bowls and basically had to be carted off 3 times in the years you didn't win. And that's how you thank him.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
be in the locker room when we get out of practice. I
Yeah.
mean, Seifert in a lot of ways looked bad in that documentary, but Seifert should look bad because that he treated Joe badly,
He
in my
did. He
opinion.
did. You know, looking back, and you're right, because it's that alpha mentality. Those the guys that are the greatest, they're the alpha mentality. It's like Tom
Yeah.
Brady. He wouldn't retire when you know he probably should have, but his mentality was, I'm still the best and I want to prove it, damn it. And that's what these guys are. And for Joe, I think he sees Jimmy in a certain way. Like, I think he sees himself in Jimmy in a way, you know what I mean? Because they kind of did the same thing to Jimmy. Okay, you can practice in the backfield. You were at training camp, you know, Jimmy's throwing in the back. Once practice started, he was out of there and he wasn't there. So I feel like Joe Montana was like, that was me 30 years ago. And they're doing the same thing to Jimmy. So I feel like he feels this connection with Jimmy and he's going to support him because in his mind, maybe Trey Lance and Brock Purdy, I guess now, are Steve Young. They're taking the old man's job. And Joe Montana is Jimmy. He's the guy. He's the OG. He should still get the chance because you won games. In Joe Montana's mind, hey, I'm the guy that won you the games. I won you the Super Bowls. You're going to move on from me. So in his mind, I think he's kind of living vicariously and he's still replaying the Super Bowl, the quarterback controversy in his mind 30 years later. I think that's what it is. I think we figured it out. This is psychology. You know, we got it. But I think that's what it is. He's projecting his 30 years ago past onto the current Niners. And in a way, there are a lot of similarities. Like they basically did that with Jimmy. Again, he was thrown on the sidelines. Once he was done, warm-ups were done. All right, Jimmy, get out of there. Let's get you out of there. Because I remember one day, training camp this year, when Jimmy actually came out and he wasn't relegated to the back dude, and he came out and everybody's like, Jimmy's in training, and that was like a big trending story. I remember. I was
Yeah.
like, whoa.
Oh, yeah.
I posted the video, it went like super viral. I was like, oh my God, what's Jimmy doing there? You know, so I think Joe sees a little bit of himself in Jimmy, maybe. So
I see a lot of Joe in Purdy, and I'm surprised Joe doesn't see
no.
himself in Purdy. You know, as far as timing, touch, accuracy, quickness, underrated. You know, a guy who's not the biggest guy, though Joe is a bigger athlete than
Yeah.
Purdy, but he was also leaner than Purdy. Purdy's got a little bit more heft to him. Jan Chozella says Montana can talk all he wants, you ungrateful Fs. Hey, Jan, I'll take that. I'll take that.
I'll take it.
You're right. Joe can say whatever he wants.